Baal. Baal was the principal god in the Canaanite and Phoenician religions, often associated with rain, storms, fertility, and crop growth. The name Baal means Lord or Master in West Semitic languages. In the Bible, Baal becomes the primary symbol of the idolatry condemned by the prophets of Israel. His worship was widespread among the nations surrounding Israel, such as the Phoenicians and Canaanites, and even influenced several kings of Israel and Judah. This includes Ahab and Jezebel, who were infamous for promoting the cult of Baal. 1 Kings 16, verse 31 to 33. The Bible portrays Baal as a serious threat to the Israelites' loyalty to Yahweh. One of the most famous accounts is the confrontation on Mount Carmel, where the prophet Elijah challenged 450 prophets of Baal to a divine contest to prove which God was real. 1 Kings 18. In that incident, Baal failed to send a sign, whereas Yahweh sent down fire from heaven, proving his power. Archaeology has uncovered numerous inscriptions and altars dedicated to Baal, including depictions of Baal of Ugarit holding a lightning bolt, affirming his role as a weather god. Baal was not just a god of rain, he also symbolized the cycle of nature's death and rebirth. His worship often involved sexual rituals and sacrifices, which were vehemently opposed by Mosaic law. Baal represented an ideological and spiritual threat that frequently led the nation of Israel to turn away from Yahweh, making him a central focus of condemnation by the prophets of the Old Testament. Ashra. Ashra was a highly revered fertility goddess in Canaanite religions and was often referred to as the consort of El, the supreme god of the Canaanite pantheon. In Ugaritic literature discovered in modern-day Syria, Ashra is described as the mother of the gods, a protector of the sea, and a source of fertility. Based on archaeological and ancient textual evidence, there are strong indications that some ancient Israelites may have associated Asherah as Yahweh's consort in their local practices, though this was vehemently rejected by the official prophetic tradition. The Bible repeatedly mentions Asherah poles, which were erected on high places and near altars. These poles were often centers of worship considered deviant by the prophets and were destroyed by reforming kings like Josiah. 2 Kings 23, verse 4 to 7. In Joshua 24, verse 14, and Judges 3, verse 7, the Israelites are rebuked for forsaking Yahweh to worship Baal and Asherah. Archaeological finds, such as the Kuntilat Ajrud inscriptions in the Sinai, contain the phrase Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting a phase of syncretism, religious blending, in the history of Israelite belief. Although not recognized in official Jewish and Christian theology, this evidence shows that the worship of Asherah was once part of the socio-religious reality of ancient Israel. Asherah symbolizes the tension between the monotheism taught by the prophets and the more pluralistic folk practices of the people. Molech, sometimes spelled Moloch, is one of the most condemned gods in the Bible, primarily because he's associated with the abhorrent practice of child sacrifice, which was strictly forbidden by Mosaic law. Molech was worshipped by the Ammonites and is mentioned in the context of the most horrifying forms of idolatry. In Leviticus 18, verse 21 and 20, verse 2 through 5, God explicitly forbids the Israelites from giving any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, with severe penalties for violators, including death. Child sacrifice to Molech likely involved burning children alive on or inside a hollow metal statue that was heated until it was red hot. This account aligns with descriptions in ancient sources, such as Greek and Roman writings, describing similar sacrifices in Carthage, where the worship of a god identified as Molech was also found. In 1 Kings 11, verse 7, it is mentioned that King Solomon, influenced by his foreign wives, built a place of worship for Molech near Jerusalem, an act that was later fiercely condemned in Jewish tradition. The most infamous site for Molech worship was the Valley of Ben Hinnom, Gehenna, which later became a symbol of hell in Jewish and Christian tradition. Molech became the symbol of moral evil in the Bible, not just because he was a foreign god, but because he demanded a practice that violated the values of life and sanctity emphasized by Yahweh. The worship of Molech represented the pinnacle of spiritual depravity, often linked to the moral downfall of Israel. Chemosh. Chemosh was the national god of the Moabites, frequently called the god of Moab in the Bible. 1 Kings 11, verse 7, 2 Kings 23, verse 13. In Moabite tradition, Chemosh was a god of war and the nation's protector, believed to grant victory or defeat in battle. He played a central role in Moab's political and spiritual identity, much like Yahweh did for Israel. King Solomon in his old age built a place of worship for Chemosh on the hill east of Jerusalem due to the influence of his foreign wives on 1 Kings 11 verse 7. This act was one of the reasons for God's anger towards Solomon, which ultimately led to the division of the Israelite kingdom after his death. A crucial archaeological source mentioning Chemosh is the Mesha Stele, 9th century BC, also known as the Moabite stone, discovered in 1868. On this inscription, King Mesha of Moab attributes his nation's defeats and victories to the favor, or wrath, of Chemosh. The stele reinforces the biblical narrative that Chemosh was central to Moabite worship and was used to justify their military campaigns. In the Bible, the worship of Chemosh is often juxtaposed with the idolatrous practices opposed by the prophets. King Josiah later destroyed the shrines for Chemosh in his effort to restore exclusive worship to Yahweh. 2 Kings 23 verse 13. In the biblical narrative, Chemosh was not just a foreign deity, but also a symbol of Israel's dangerous political alliances and spiritual deviation. Dagon. Dagon was a god highly revered by the Philistines, often associated with fertility and grain. While sometimes linked to the sea, archaeological and literary sources are still debated as to whether he was primarily a grain god or a sea god. In the Bible, Dagon is explicitly mentioned in Judges 16 verse 23 and 1 Samuel 5, where he appears as the national god of the Philistines and a symbol of their nation's strength. The most famous story involving Dagon occurs when the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant. After defeating the Israelites, they take the Ark to the temple of Dagon in the city of Ashdod and place it beside Dagon's statue. 1 Samuel 5 verse 2 to 4. The next morning, however, the statue is found fallen on its face before the ark. After it is set back up, the statue is found fallen again the following day, this time with its head and hands broken off, leaving only its torso. This event is interpreted as a direct demonstration of Yahweh's power over the gods of other nations. Furthermore, in Judges 16 verse 23, Dagon is the god the Philistines are worshiping when they celebrate Samson's capture. In the climactic scene, Samson tears down the pillars of Dagon's temple, destroying it and killing thousands of Philistines, including their leaders. This event became a symbol of the defeat and humiliation of Dagon worship in the face of Yahweh's might. In the Bible, Dagon is not merely a foreign god, but a symbol of the limited power of other deities when confronted with the majesty and supremacy of Yahweh. Astarti. Astarti, called Ashtoreth in the Bible, was a goddess of fertility, love, and war originating from Canaanite and Phoenician traditions. She is synonymous with the Babylonian goddess Ishtar and the Sumerian goddess Inanna. She was often paired with Baal as a divine consort and was one of the deities who most frequently caused the Israelites to fall into idolatry. In 1 Kings 11 verse 5, King Solomon is said to have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, as a result of the influence of his foreign wives. This became one of the reasons for Yahweh's anger toward Solomon for turning his heart to other gods. In Judges 2 verse 13, Israel is explicitly said to have forsaken Yahweh to follow Baal and Ashtoreth, illustrating just how powerful this goddess's influence was among the Israelites. Astarti is often associated with sexual rituals and temple prostitution, which were considered part of fertility worship at the time. These practices were in stark opposition to Mosaic law, which demanded moral and spiritual holiness. In iconography, Astarte is often depicted with symbols of stars, the moon, and horns, and sometimes holding weapons reflecting her aspects as a goddess of war and power. Archaeological evidence, such as small figurines and inscriptions bearing Astarte's name, has been found at various Canaanite and Phoenician sites, reinforcing her presence and influence in the daily life of the region's people. In the Bible, Ashtoreth became a symbol of the spiritual temptation that repeatedly drew Israel away from exclusive worship of Yahweh, representing the struggle between faithfulness and apostasy. Baal and Nebo. Baal and Nebo were two major deities in the Babylonian religion, mentioned explicitly in Isaiah 46 verse 1, which prophesies Baal bows down, Nebo stoops low, their idols are borne by beasts of burden. This verse symbolically depicts the collapse of Babylon's power, represented by its two chief gods. Baal was a title meaning lord or master, similar to Baal in Canaanite culture. In the Babylonian context, Bel was identified with Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, considered the creator and ruler of the universe. Marduk Bel had a great temple called the Esagila in the city of Babylon and was worshipped as the patron of the Babylonian Empire. He symbolized the political, military, and religious power of Babylon, which seemed unshakable at the time. Nebo, or Nabu in Babylonian texts, was the god of wisdom and writing. He was often depicted holding a stylus and was considered the scribe of human destiny. Nebo was also believed to be the patron of kings and scribes and was associated with the holy mountain and city of Beersheba near Babylon. In Isaiah's prophecy, both are described as fallen gods, dragged away as cargo, unable to save their worshippers. This message theologically asserts Yahweh's sovereignty over all nations and their gods, and foretells the fall of Babylon, which historically occurred when Persia conquered the city in 539 BC. Bel and Nebo became symbols of the collapse of worldly powers that oppose God, affirming that man-made deities cannot stand against the true power of Yahweh. Divine Counsel. The concept of a divine counsel is one of the most mysterious and significant themes in biblical theology. Although the Bible strongly emphasizes monotheism, several passages depict Yahweh as a king presiding over an assembly of heavenly beings, referred to in the text as sons of God, Ma ben Elohim, or even gods and Elohim in specific contexts. Psalm 82 verse 1 states, God presides in the great assembly, he renders judgment among the gods. This verse uses the word Elohim twice, and first referring to Yahweh, and second referring to other divine or heavenly beings in his council. In the following verses, these gods are condemned for their injustice and told they will die like mere mortals. This demonstrates that their authority is limited and subordinate to Yahweh's supreme sovereignty. In Job 1 verse 6, the sons of God gather before the Lord, and in this meeting, the Satan, Satan, is also present, indicating a heavenly court structure where decisions concerning humanity are made. This concept is similar to the divine structures in Mesopotamian and Canaanite cultures where gods gathered in a heavenly council. However, it is unique in the Bible because Yahweh holds an unrivaled position of ultimate authority. Modern interpretations of the divine council often view these beings as high-ranking angels, spiritual rulers of nations, or even lesser gods who were later sidelined in the development of pure monotheism. The divine council reveals that the spiritual world of the Bible is more complex and hierarchical than a simple opposition between God and the devil, with Yahweh reigning as the supreme commander over all spiritual forces. The Nephilim. The Nephilim are among the most mysterious figures in the Bible, mentioned in Genesis 6 verse 1 through 4 and Numbers 13 verse 33. In Genesis, the Nephilim are described as appearing when the sons of God, Bene Elohim, took wives from the daughters of men, producing offspring who were the mighty men of old, men of renown. The term Nephilim is often translated as the fallen ones or giants, though its precise meaning is still debated. In some Jewish traditions and apocryphal interpretations, like the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim are considered the hybrid offspring of celestial beings, often identified as fallen angels, and human women, resulting in a race of powerful and violent giants. This story is often linked to the cause of the world's moral corruption before the Great Flood. In Numbers 13, verse 33, the Israelite spies returning from the land of Canaan report seeing Nephilim there, describing themselves as like grasshoppers in comparison. This shows that in the perception of the Israelites, the Nephilim were regarded as extraordinarily large and terrifying beings. The Nephilim are often connected to legends of giant races or prehistoric heroes found in many ancient Near Eastern cultures. Some modern interpreters view the story of the Nephilim as an attempt to explain the origins of legendary figures of the past, while others interpret them literally as semi-divine beings. In biblical theology, the story of the Nephilim highlights a transgression of the boundary between the divine and human realms, which contributed to the moral decay before the flood and became one of the reasons God decided to destroy the earth in the time of Noah. The Queen of Heaven. The Queen of Heaven is a divine figure mentioned directly in Jeremiah 7 verse 18 and Jeremiah 44 verse 17 to 19 and 25. She was a goddess worshipped by a significant portion of the people of Judah, especially the women who burned incense, made cakes in her image, and poured out drink offerings to her. In the biblical context, worship of the Queen of Heaven was considered one of the greatest forms of rebellion against Yahweh. The exact identity of the Queen of Heaven is not specified in the Bible, but most biblical scholars and archaeologists associate this figure with Ishtar, a Babylonian goddess, or Astarte Ashtoreth, a Canaanite goddess. Both were extremely popular goddesses of fertility, war, and love throughout the ancient Near East. They were often depicted with symbols of stars, the moon, or a throne, and are synonymous with the Great Mother goddess worshipped in various forms by many cultures. In Jeremiah 44, the Israelites in Egypt defiantly reject the prophet Jeremiah's warning to abandon the worship of the Queen of Heaven. They claim instead that their lives were prosperous when they worshipped her, and that disaster only struck when they stopped. This reveals how deeply entrenched the worship of the Queen of Heaven was in the people's beliefs, even superseding the influence of Yahweh's prophets. Worship of the Queen of Heaven was often linked to pagan rituals, such as baking special cakes, offering libations, and most likely ritual sexual practices. For biblical theology, this worship was the ultimate symbol of spiritual betrayal, which eventually brought judgment upon Jerusalem and Judah. The Queen of Heaven stands as a prime example of how religious syncretism, the blending of Yahweh worship with pagan religions, became a central theological crisis during the time of the prophets.